So it's now my pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Fleet Maull to present our featured entitled Polyvagal Theory and Co-Regulation. Fleet Maull, PhD, CMTP, is an author, mindfulness teacher, management consultant, trainer, and executive coach who facilitates deep transformation for individuals and organizations through his philosophy and program of radical responsibility. Dr. Maull currently serves as the CEO and Director of Training, Research, and Development for Prison Mindfulness Institute, Center for Mindfulness in Public Safety, and the Engaged Mindfulness Institute. As well, he is the founder and CEO of Heart Mind Institute and Windhorse Seminars and Consulting. Dr. Maull is a pioneer and thought leader in the mainstream mindfulness movement, developing cutting-edge mindfulness-based and trauma-informed leadership trainings, transformational seminars, and consulting and coaching programs he delivers in diverse business, nonprofit, and government settings, including his pioneering work in developing mindfulness-based emotional intelligence and mindfulness-based wellness and resiliency training programs. Dr. Maull is a certified professional mindfulness teacher, an advisory board member with the International Mindfulness Teachers Association, and a board member of the Institute for Organizational Mindfulness. Thank you for joining us this evening, Fleet.
Great. Thank you, John, and welcome, everyone. So we're going to be taking a look at Stephen Porges' Polyvagal Theory this evening. And actually, John, we will go into breakout rooms at some point, but when we come back, you may want to keep recording because we'll be kind of talking about it. I don't think the breakout rooms get recorded anyway, do they? Or if they do, we can not record just that portion. But
yeah, I can just put it on pause, Fleet, and we'll be able to jump back into the recording.
Yeah. Great. Wonderful. Okay. So Stephen Porges' Polyvagal Theory. So it's called Polyvagal Theory because it has to do with, many things. It's a really deep look at neurophysiology, both within our own body, the human organism, body, heart, and mind, as well as in the relational field and interpersonal connectedness and so forth. And it's called Polyvagal Theory because it focuses, at least in part, on the action of the vagus nerve. And so we'll be looking at that. So the first thing I wanted to cover, this isn't necessarily part of Polyvagal Theory, but it's related. You could certainly talk about this in polyvagal terms. So just the phenomena of mirror neurons. Just the fact that we do impact each other all the time. We are in all kinds of nested relational fields together as human beings, and we really are much more interconnected than maybe we might imagine sometimes. We tend to think of ourselves as discrete skin-encapsulated, beings that end with the skin, but actually we're energetic beings, and we exist within fields of energy, and we're reading and transmitting, receiving and transmitting all the time, and actually, the way we learn from infancy forward is through the process of mirroring, imitation, and so forth. And the human eye gaze is a very important part of that. So, our brains tend to mirror. Not all neurons are mirror neurons, but some of the neurons in our brain are mirror neurons, and they mirror what we see visually. It has to do with intentionality as well, but it has to do with connectedness with others, and so, it's one simple example many of us have probably been familiar with, or we're holding a little child, or if any of us have been parents that had infants, the kind of goo-goo gaga stuff we do, and we smile, they smile, we giggle, they giggle, we play peekaboo, and that kind of facial imitation that we happen is a function of mirror neurons, and it's really how we learn and how we connect. And it can be a conscious process and an unconscious process, and actually, John and I focus with the public safety professionals we train how to actually unmirror from the environments that we work in, because we get unconsciously mirrored, or even if we did to some degree consciously mirror, if we don't consciously unmirror, we leave work and we get home and we're still mirrored to that correctional environment or that first responder environment or law enforcement environment. And that may not be the environment we want to be mirrored to when we're at home. Right? It may not be the person that our family is looking to have show up, right? Who's still mirrored to the workplace, right? So there's lots of ways we can unmirror, right? And just to understand that it is a fact, and if anybody's ever studied anything about NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, mirroring is a big part of that. It's a way to create rapport and influence with others. It could even ostensibly be used in a manipulative way, but certainly it can be used in a good way consciously to create rapport with others and have a positive influence. And it has to do with posture and facial expression and vocal tone and lots of things. So I'm just pointing this out to say that we're constantly in a field of communication with each other, and you'll see how that'll play out as being important when we're talking about polyvagal theory. Also, just as background, here a depiction of the autonomic nervous system, and this part of our nervous system controls most of the processes in the human body, the most complex system in the known universe, and most of which operates without our having to direct it. We actually have to direct very little of it, actually. And it has two branches. It has an upregulating sympathetic branch and a downregulating parasympathetic branch. And the upregulating branch, very necessary just to begin with for alertness, and then beyond alertness, it can go into stress, and it perceives stress, and it can go all the way into panic and acting out and so forth to the extreme. And the parasympathetic branch is, relaxation, restoration, but it can go all the way down into unconsciousness, right? And the two are happening all the time. They're happening all the time, and there's an appropriate balance of the two for any human activity, whether it's responding to a crisis or being in a state of readiness at work, or being in a more kind of sitting at our desk writing reports, or being at home with our family, or being out involved in social recreational activities, or focusing on some hobby activity, or whatever it is we're doing, reading a book. There's an appropriate level of the balance of these two parts of our nervous system for any activity we're doing. And the great thing is that we can learn to self-regulate this, and we're going to do a breathing exercise in a moment where we will be self-regulating this, because the autonomic nervous system and the parasympathetic and sympathetic branches of the autonomic nervous system are connected with the breath. When we breathe in, there's naturally a slight activation of the sympathetic branch. When we breathe out, a slight activation of the parasympathetic branch. So if we need more parasympathetic activation because we're a little, getting stressed out, overly activated, we can emphasize the out breath, the exhale, right? If we're too downregulated, kind of groggy, drowsy, we can emphasize the inhale. And there's a very quick kind of inhale focused breathing we can do that'll increase our alertness, right? So by using the breath, we can regulate our own nervous system, which is great news, because if we don't take ownership for regulating our nervous system, guess who is regulating it? Everybody but us. And that may not be a pretty sight sometimes. We all live in this interface between our childhood conditioning, which we had absolutely nothing to say about, and the world around us. And, if we had really benevolent childhood conditioning, which probably very few of us did, and if the world around us were completely benevolent, then that might be okay to be kind of just in that space, not very consciously and in a just kind of habitual reactive way. But again, that's not benevolent for most of us. And so when we don't take ownership for how we navigate that space and being able to self-regulate, then we're kind of just in there getting, pushed around in that interface between the circumstances we find ourselves in and how that interacts with our childhood conditioning. The good news is it doesn't have to be that way. We can take ownership and become self-directed, self-regulated, and move into more of a self-leadership position in our lives. And you'll see here the vagus nerve there, right? So the vagus nerve runs down the parasympathetic side, and anything that increases vagal tone, for example, diaphragmatic breathing, kind of massages the vagus nerve and increases parasympathetic activation, right? So that's why we're calling this polyvagal theory, a focus on the vagus nerve. So here's a chart that it's probably too small for you to read the stuff there on the right, but the important thing is to see these three zones there. So at the bottom, you see the green zone, and that's called the social engagement zone, and where we have our social engagement systems online. And the idea of polyvagal work is to learn how to spend as much time in our lives with our social engagement system online. and being able to interact from others. So we're in a relational responsive mode. Now, as we start to get triggered, if we get the amygdala activation, right, the alarm bells, the amygdala, and we start to, get even a mild, fight, flight, or freeze start activity, but fight or flight to begin with, we're starting to move up into that, kind of whatever that is, orangish red zone there. And that's the sympathetic branch. So our sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system is getting activated, right? So the balance is going that way. And you can see it can go into flight or fight. So, we might start off with feeling frustrated, then irritation, anger, rage, and we might go to fisticuffs, right? Or on the other hand, concern, worry, anxiety, fear, panic, and a sense of flight, wanting to run, right? And so that goes to, and then it can go beyond that to where we're getting completely overwhelmed by the activation, right? And that's where we start to go into a freeze response. And this, when it's a highly activated response, this is different than the deep parasympathetic disassociation shutdown. That's different. This is actually a highly aroused state, but we go into a kind of a paralysis, right? And characteristically, as we're moving into it, it's a sense of helplessness, and the body is starting to conserve its energy, and we can experience it as numbness, depression. We can experience it as disassociation, but again, I'll point out later the difference between an activated freeze response and a kind of feigned death response, or a complete kind of catatonia that's overactivated sympathetic branch, a parasympathetic response. Sometimes we get triggered, as we all know. We've been all the way to the top of that bell curve, and then on the way back down, we don't have really good feelings by having been that out of control. We feel shame, we feel shut down, sense of hopelessness, and there can even be a preparation for death and feeling completely trapped. This is an extreme activation, right? So there's always a going up and down. Now, hopefully, we don't go all the way up into that freeze zone. Hopefully, we get triggered and are able to self-regulate down. And you see that wavy line there at the bottom. Well, that's us self-regulating, because we're not going to be able to live our lives in a bubble where we're always going to be in that green zone, right? Things are going to be activating us all the time. But can we self-regulate so we can stay more kind of in that territory where we can handle that higher sympathetic activation? We can handle some stress. We can handle some challenging situations, but we can still do it in a relatively well-regulated way, right? And there's another model that we often reference, Dan Siegel's window of tolerance or zone of resilience, and there where we're expanding the bandwidth of what we can handle in terms of life's challenges and still remain in a well-regulated, responsive relational mode, rather than getting triggered into fear reactive survival mode, which is mechanical and on autopilot to one degree or another, right? That's where the amygdala are actually hijacking the brain and turning over control to the survival brain, right? The thinking brain gets hijacked by the feeling brain and turns it over to the survival brain, and we're on pure autopilot, just in survival mode. So we can self-regulate to avoid going to those extremes, either to keep ourselves from going up into the higher parts of fight or flight, and even less so into freeze, and be able to navigate degrees of stress and challenge still in a relatively conscious, responsive relational mode. So there's a lot of talk about safety in polyvagal theory. Safety, in a sense, there's something called neuroception. Now, neuroception is our nervous system reading the world around us. Now, it does read the world through the five senses, but it's even, we live in an energetic field, so the nervous system is directly receiving. Just like everything is transmitting, we're receiving, right? And so we are picking up cues through the five senses, but we're also even picking up cues directly through our nervous system in an energetic sense. And so we're scanning the world around us all the time. Like you remember some of those movies, I don't know, was it Terminator or whatever, or you got, they're kind of like constantly reading the world, and anybody they meet, they're kind of doing the scan, right? So we're all scanning the world around us all the time. So what do you think we're scanning for? We're scanning for good news? No, we're scanning for threats. Because what's job one for any species? Survival, right? So of course we're scanning for threats, we're scanning for danger. So if someone's coming into a space where we are, indoors or outdoor, but someone approaching and we don't know them, what's our default position regarding them, friend or foe? It's foe until proven otherwise, right? Maybe we actually recognize them as someone we know, or they're dressed kind of similarly in a way that feels familiar and comfortable to us, or they're wearing the uniform we wear, or something like that. Then we can start to relax a bit, and they may approach further, and there's enough signaling of safety that eventually we're willing to even shake somebody's hand, or if we know them, give them a hug, right? And we get the oxytocin release, which is the neurotransmitter that allows us approaching behavior, right? But until that, we're back here, checking it out, scanning, right? So we're scanning the world around us all the time. And so people are scanning us, we're scanning them, right? So we're transmitting and receiving all the time. So obviously what we want to communicate for good relations, workable relations, effective relationships in the workplace and at home, we want to be communicating safety, right? We want to be communicating safety, which invites others to have their social engagement system online, right? Now, we want to get our social engagement system online through self-regulation, where it's appropriate. If there's danger, there's danger. But when we're in interactions with coworkers and meetings and, places where there is a relative level of, there's not imminent danger, then we want to be at our best and our most relational and communicative, responsive best, right? So we're going to self-regulate to keep our social engagement system online, even if there are things happening in a meeting or whatever in the workplace that might be triggering us a bit. We're going to work to self-regulate and keep our social engagement systems online. And in doing so, we're going to invite others to have their social engagement systems online. And that's the process of co-regulation that we're going to talk about and practice. So I'm sure many of you as folks in law enforcement, first responders, public safety, have had some kind of training in de-escalation skills, right? So de-escalation skills, what do they have to do with? They have to do with our posture, how we're holding our body. They have to do with our facial expression. They have to do with our vocal tone, right? So when we speak in a well-modulated vocal tone, that invites others to have their social engagement system online. If I get into a deep voice and start speaking in a very authoritative way, whoa, that starts to trigger somebody out of that social engagement zone. Or if I speak in a really high voice, and irritating or something, that'll also. But if I speak in a well-modulated, kind of mid-level tone, right, that's going to invite others to have their social engagement systems online. If I'm have a relaxed facial expression or even a smile that's a genuine smile, that's going to invite others to have their social engagement system online. If I'm standing in a posture that feels open and relaxed, as opposed to, like this or some kind of threatening posture, that's inviting others to have their social engagement systems online. And then, the way I speak and the way I use my eye gaze and so forth. So there's all these things that, we're transmitting and others are reading. And, we've all probably had a moment when we met somebody, maybe it was somebody we already knew, or maybe it was a new friend, but we just kind of got into this flow with each other. And we had this beautiful conversation, this beautiful moment, and everything just flowed, right? We've all had those experiences. Well, what's happening is somehow the two of us have stumbled into co-regulating each other into this flow state through a deep level of perceived safety and connection, right? And that creates that kind of flow. And so that's kind of optimal co-regulation. And of course, there's appropriate co-regulation for any type of relationship or type of situation, right? And, what's getting communicated there? What's getting communicated is either safety, danger, or even actual life threat. And, life threat will take us up, if our life is really threatened, can take us up into that freeze response. Before that, it's going to take us into, either the fight or flight generally. Now, there is another type of freeze response I mentioned, which is very low sympathetic activation or none at all, high degree of parasympathetic, and we just start to check out. We just kind of check out and disassociate that way. And that can happen as well. We can get triggered into that. Or we get triggered into fight or flight, but then it goes beyond fight or flight into just paralysis. So there's kind of two different types of freeze responses. Dan Siegel does a good job of making that clear in his model. So here's another diagram to kind of show the pathway of how this works, right? So there we are down, we're perceiving safety. We're experiencing the neuroception of safety. Our nervous system is reading safety, right? And so we feel that there's that green zone. And then our nervous system directly and through the five senses starts to perceive some danger, right? So we start moving up into what here is a yellow zone, right? And there's a perception of danger, right? And that can start to have those characteristics of fight or flight. And then if we feel real life threatened, then it can go up into that red zone, which is terror and overwhelm. Now, I've only experienced a freeze one time a month. Now, we all experience freeze momentarily. So something happens and there's just this momentary pause. So freeze is not rare to experience in just moments. We'll experience just this moment where our kind of mind stops and there's just a slight pause. We can learn to kind of recognize those, especially when we're around stressful situations. But one time when I was a little kid, I was out doing something I shouldn't have been doing with some kids who were a little older than I was and throwing snowballs at cars. Well, you were throwing a bunch of snowballs at cars and suddenly a car screeches its brakes on and the doors fly open and out jump what looked like four really big guys to me. They were probably, college age or something, but I was a little kid, right? And we all took off running. And fortunately, we were near some kind of brush and some bushes and stuff and trees. And I started running into there. And then suddenly my body just freezed. It just freezed in terror. I was a little kid. I was like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years old. And I literally, fortunately, I kind of fell down in some bushes. And I literally could not move. It's the only time I ever experienced this. I could not move a muscle. I was in total paralysis for about 5 or 10 minutes. But fortunately, I'd gotten behind something and they didn't see me. They didn't buy me. I was fortunate. But that was one time in my life I remember actually experiencing this terror that went into actual physical freeze paralysis. And then we start to come down. And we have one set of kind of activation feelings on the way up and another set on the way down. And we all have been activated. We've all been triggered. We've all had our buttons pushed. And we know we've gotten into a fight with our spouse or with somebody at work. And we know what it starts to feel like when we get up there. And then we all know kind of coming down. And coming down, there can be feelings of shame and loss of control and concern about what's happened in the interaction and so forth. So we're familiar with that. And the whole notion of with self-regulation and co-regulation, again, we want to stay down here as much. We don't want to go all the way up here, right? We want to keep it as much down near this green zone as possible. Now we need to learn to navigate that yellow zone up there successfully, but we don't want to have to go way up in there, right? Okay, so we're going to go into a dyad process here. So let's go ahead and we'll do some straw breathing. So how many people here have been introduced to the straw breathing before? Most everybody, maybe not quite everybody. Okay, it's very simple. We breathe in through the nose and then out through pursed lips, as if blowing through a straw, which is why it's called straw breathing. And you can use a physical straw, but pursed lips works. So in through the nose, out through pursed lips, in through the nose, out through pursed lips. You're just going to continue that way of breathing. And then we'll begin counting because we want the out breath to be twice as long as the in breath. So I'll lead us on a counting to begin with, and then you can find your own rhythm, which you can then maintain. So we'll breathe in a 4 count and out an 8 count. So in, everybody exhale a little bit and we'll start at in breath. So slight exhale and then in, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, in, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, in, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like that. So I'm sure you all got the idea now. And you can find your own rhythm, or you could breathe in a 5 count, out a 10 count, whatever works best for you. So let's just take a little sharing. What was that like for folks? What was your experience of, we're all on Zoom and other video conferencing formats a lot. And, we really miss that connection that we're able to do in person. Now, some of us were in a lot of meetings in person where people don't connect very much either, probably. But at any rate, it's an interesting phenomena to do it on Zoom. So what was your experience, both in terms of self-regulating and the attempt to co-regulate? Anybody?
I'll say something because nobody else is. I found it interesting, Fleet, and my experience, and I've been on Zoom a million times now since COVID. The most important part I see is having faces on screens rather than names and black boxes, because I don't get anything out of that. And my wife, through her work, has to do this as well. And it's like her partners don't go on screen. And it's like you don't feel like you're there with somebody. There's enough of an experience I felt of looking at the screen. I see everybody's face, whether they're looking at that dot or not. I have no idea. But I feel their presence. So I didn't notice, this co-regulation component. I felt as I looked at the edge of my computer at the dot, I was losing somebody who was in that room. So I'm working with it, but I feel as I look around now, I see everybody, they're smiling. I'll say a smile is one of the greatest things what a gift. So that's me.
The thing to keep in mind, though, Gary, is that's a one-way experience, because you're seeing everybody smile and they're seeing you looking down at your screen. They're not seeing your eye gaze, right? So that's why it's helpful to go back and forth. And it's much more pronounced when you're just on with one person than a big group. But even still, when you're speaking in a group, it's actually very helpful to actually look at the camera while you're speaking, because then they see you looking at them, even though momentarily you're not seeing them very well. You're giving them the experience of seeing you, like making eye contact when you're having a conversation with someone. Somebody else, what was your experience with it?
Well, there's always a certain amount of anxiety, for lack of a better word, when we go into a group with someone, whether we know them or not. And I was in the group with Robert, and I see Robert every week, and I, communicated a few brief emails over the time, so I know Robert. But yet there was still that apprehension or anxiety going into that group. And I noticed as we were working to co-regulate, I felt myself go back into the safe zone. I just going into the group, even with someone I knew, I had escalated probably into the yellow area, and I actually went back green. So
Great, wonderful. And that may have been a combination of the self-regulating with the straw breathing, as well as doing the attempt to co-regulate with Robert, and we bring ourselves back into that green zone. Absolutely. Robert, you want to share something? Well, you were on the other side of that experience. What was it like for you?
Well, I found myself thinking, actually sharing went first, and I found myself having these thoughts about, well, if I'm really co-regulating, should my breathing pattern be the same as hers? And that was kind of distracting, but ultimately, just because there was a sense of safety, and we do know each other, and because the very process of straw breathing helps us de-escalate and regulate. So I really determined for myself that it really didn't matter if the breathing pattern was the same. The co-regulation, the safety, and being in the green zone was there for me.
Yeah, that's great. And there are lots of ways to co-regulate, with posture, with vocal tone, with eye gaze, and so forth. People can do co-regulation with breath, and that's done in with some end-of-life caregiving. There's a process called co-breathing, where you actually match either someone's breath directly, or you match like if they're breathing really fast, you might not want to breathe that fast, but you do two breaths to their one breath to their two breaths, or one breath to their four breaths. So you're in the same sync of the same pattern, and it can really help invite others into relaxation and even into their dying process. It's called co-breathing. It is a form of co-regulation. Yeah. Anybody else in a room with somebody they didn't know? And what was that like, attempting to connect and co-regulate together? Come on, I know you all had experiences, so this is the bravery part of the program here, where we share our experience.
So I was with Dave, and Dave and I have talked a couple of times. So this is nice to see him, and be with him that way. And I got to talk first because I had longer hair, although mine isn't real long. So it was really great to spend that time with him, and have a little discussion.
Mm-hmm.
I think it will change our communications on the phone too. So.
Mm-hmm. Great. And co-regulation is completely possible on the telephone as well, even without the visual. And just having the awareness that what we're really talking about here is just beginning to have this awareness. Now, doing it here on Zoom is quite challenging because of the camera screen thing. But just starting to have the awareness around this, you can bring it into all your interactions and relationships, and just bringing a subtle awareness in it, you'll naturally get better at co-regulation. Right? You'll just kind of, by bringing that awareness into your interactions with others, you'll naturally get better at it. Yeah. Somebody else? Anybody else? John, how about you? Who were you with, and what was your experience?
I was all by myself, Lee.
Oh, that's right. Well, were you co-regulating? Because I know you do have several personalities. In fact, when we meet, you usually have 2 different Zoom or 3 different Zoom screens for your 3 different computers.
Well, I can tell you that one of me got up and got my heart rate monitor, so I strapped on my HRV monitor, and I'm co-regulating with my iPhone and checking my HRV and heart rate.
Great. Okay. Katie, how about you?
I was in a room with Gary, and to be honest, I was having a hard time noticing the difference between when he was looking at the screen and when he wasn't. I think sometimes where your box is, can kind of make that distinguish, make a smaller impact on that. So he noticed a lot more when I wasn't. And when I was going kind of to the side and up, but I couldn't tell quite as much on his.
Well,
So
Gary's
I
a little
think
bit.
that I was probably harder.
Yeah, Gary's a little bit in a dark place, and his eyes are shaded a bit, so it's kind of hard for me to actually see his eyes because he's front lit and his eyeglasses are shading his eyes a bit, so it makes it a little hard to see.
Yeah, that may be. And I asked him if he was distracted by everything I had going on behind me. He said no, though.
How many people stayed on gallery view with both of your pictures up there? Did anybody switch to speaker view? Yeah, I switched over to. I realized at some point I don't need to be co-regulating with both myself and with Amy, so I switched to speaker view, and that actually made it easier for me because I was seeing obviously a larger image of Amy. Yeah.
I'll speak up. So I was in with Fleet, and I appreciate Sherry saying that she experienced a level of anxiety because you think, oh goodness, you're just kind of tossed into a dance with you don't even know who. And so I'm like, oh hey, it's Fleet. Hi, we'd not really met before. So
Speed dating.
What's that?
Speed dating.
Yes, right. So we were tossed into a room together and had a wonderful time. I was already pretty calm from the breathing, but even more so because he created a very safe space. He has a calm voice. And so that also helped. I think what I really appreciated about trying to learn to co-regulate is I subconsciously for a long time just felt like virtual meetings felt kind of grating because I never felt like someone was looking at me. And that just kind of was a little bit of a slight all the time. And so I loved the idea. We kind of talked a little bit in our meeting about how maybe if someone's really trying to share something with you, maybe on a deeper level, just drop looking at them and look into the camera and just kind of envision and try to use that peripheral vision if you can to kind of just get a sense of where they are. But that is just a gift, it is kind of taking away the joy of looking at a person from you, but it might really help that person feel seen and heard. And he even said felt, just that you're feeling what they're saying. So I really appreciated that as a communicator. I really appreciated that. And I hope to take that back to my team. So very helpful.
Oh, thank you, Amy. Thank you very much. Well, I think we're kind of over our time a little bit, a couple minutes, unless anybody else has something they'd like to share, please jump in, whether Troy or Scott or anybody, if you want to jump in with a little sharing or something before we finish up. Well, I guess we're good to go then. So thank you all very much. I'll turn it back over to John and Robert to bring us home. Great.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you, Robert. And thank you all for coming, and great to see everybody. And thank you for the work and service you do for our communities. Thank you very much. Be well.
Be well.
Take good care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night.